At 3:47 on Thanksgiving afternoon, my phone rang 11 times in under 4 minutes. I know the exact count because I checked later, sitting in a rocking chair on the porch of a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with a cup of black coffee going cold in my hand. The leaves had already turned. The air smelled like wood smoke and pine. My old beagle, Hank, was asleep across my boots. I watched the screen light up. My son, Gerald, then my daughter-in-law, Patricia, then my younger son, Marcus, then Gerald again. The notifications stacked up so fast the phone never stopped vibrating. I set it face down on the armrest and listened to the wind move through the trees. I knew exactly why they were calling, and I knew exactly when those calls would start. Friends, have you ever given everything you had to people who only noticed when the giving stopped? Have you ever spent years being the one who held everything together, only to realize that nobody ever asked whether you wanted to? I have. For 12 Thanksgiving holidays in a row, I paid for every meal, every rental, every last thing my family needed to gather around a table and complain. And every single year, I walked away feeling less like a father and more like a man whose only purpose was making sure the check cleared. This past November, I let something different happen. I let 347 say what I never could. Before I tell you how it got to that point, let me ask you something, friends. Has anyone in your life ever treated your generosity like it was simply part of the job description? Leave that in the comments, because what happened on Thanksgiving didn't start in November. It started 12 years ago, in a rented vacation home on the Carolina coast, when my son Gerald made a joke about the wine selection that I have never forgotten. My name is Ray. I am 63 years old. I worked 31 years in highway construction management, and I retired 2 years ago with a decent savings account, a bad right knee, and more free time than I knew what to do with. My wife, Sandra, passed 8 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that disease tends to be. After she was gone, I threw myself into the one thing I thought I could still do right. I kept the family together. Gerald is my oldest. He is 40 now, married to Patricia, and they have 2 daughters, Brooke and Leah. Marcus is 36, unmarried, and has spent most of the last decade cycling through careers the way some men cycle through cars. Neither of them had it easy after losing their mother. I understood that. I gave them everything I had left to give.
Thanksgiving tradition started the year after Sandra died.
I could not bear the thought of spending that first holiday alone in the house where we had raised them, so I suggested we rent a place somewhere and all be together. Gerald thought the Outer Banks would be nice. I looked up rentals that evening and found a house that fit 7 comfortably. I paid the deposit before anyone even asked who was covering it. Nobody offered to split it. I did not push the subject. That first year was hard, but it was honest. We were all still grieving. We ate together and cried a little and laughed a little, and I went to bed feeling like I had done something right. The second year, Gerald mentioned that the house the previous year had been a bit small. I found a bigger place. Marcus wanted to be closer to a golf course. I found one near a golf course. Patricia had dietary preferences that required a stocked kitchen of a certain standard. I made sure the kitchen was stocked. The bill was larger. Nobody noticed, or if they did, they said nothing. By the 4th year, the vacation rental was no longer a place we gathered to be together. It had become a production I was expected to stage. Gerald and Patricia would send links to properties starting in August. Not suggestions, friends. Links. Just dropped into a family text chain with a message that said something like, "This one looks good for this year." No question, no discussion. Just a quiet assumption that I would open the link, look it over, and handle it. Marcus had his own contributions. He did not worry about the house much, but he had opinions about food. He wanted specific things. A smoked turkey from a particular butcher in Asheville he had read about online. A certain brand of bourbon that cost more than most people's car payments. One year he sent me an article about a catering company that did full holiday spreads and said, simply, "Have you seen this?" I had not. I hired them. The expenses grew the way debt grows when you stop watching it. Slowly, and then all at once. What started as a few $100s in rental deposits had become a full-scale operation. Rental house, groceries, catering, activities for the grandchildren, gifts for everyone at the table. One year I calculated the total after the fact and sat with the number for a long time. And through all of it, what I heard most was what was wrong. The house was too far from town. The internet connection was not good enough for the football game. The turkey was dry, even though I had not cooked it. The traffic coming down from Virginia had put everyone in a bad mood, and somehow that mood needed somewhere to land, and more often than not it landed on me. I remember one Thanksgiving specifically. It was 6 years in. I had rented a beautiful farmhouse in the Shenandoah Valley, stone fireplace, mountain views, a wraparound porch that Sandra would have loved. I had spent weeks getting the details right. I hired a woman named Denise who did holiday catering out of a commercial kitchen in Staunton. The food was extraordinary. I bought gifts for the grandchildren that they had specifically asked for. I drove 4 hours to get there early and make sure everything was set up before anyone arrived. Gerald and Patricia walked in, looked around, set their bags down, and Patricia said, "It's nice, but the pictures made it look bigger." That was it. No hello, no thank you. No acknowledgement of the 4-hour drive or the weeks of planning or the farmhouse that cost me more than some people make in a month. Just a mild disappointment, delivered like a weather report. I said nothing. I told myself it was the long drive talking. I told myself they would settle in and it would get better. And in some ways it did, for a few hours. We ate, we watched football, the girls ran around the yard. But the feeling stayed with me like a stone in a shoe. Not what she said, what she didn't say. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked whether I had eaten yet, or whether the drive had been hard on my knee. Nobody asked whether this holiday, the first one without Sandra's sister, who had also just passed, was difficult for me. They arrived as guests, and I operated as staff. I kept returning to that year as the one where something changed inside me. Not dramatically, not with any clear decision, just a slow, quiet shift. Like a door that has been pushed open so many times the hinges have started to give. I want to be honest with you, friends. I know some of you are already thinking what I should have done differently. I know some of you are thinking that I trained them to expect this, and that I only had myself to blame. You are not wrong. I know that. I spent a lot of time on that porch in the Blue Ridge thinking about exactly that. But knowing where a habit comes from does not always make it easy to break, especially when the habit is tied up in love and grief and the fear of losing what little family you still have left. I tried to say something once. 3 years ago, after a Thanksgiving where Marcus had borrowed money for his flight and then spent the weekend ordering expensive drinks and putting them on a card I had preloaded for household expenses, on the drive home I called Gerald and I said, "I need to talk about how we handle the costs of these trips going forward." Gerald said, "Dad, we all appreciate everything you do." And then he changed the subject to his daughter's soccer tournament. I did not bring it up again. Last year was the year everything finally broke open. Not in a dramatic scene, not in a fight or a confrontation. It broke open in a moment so small and so ordinary that it almost slipped by unnoticed. I had spent the weeks before Thanksgiving arranging what I thought would be a genuinely special year. Gerald's older daughter Brooke had just turned 13, and I wanted the holiday to feel memorable for her. I found a renovated farmhouse outside of Charlottesville. 5 bedrooms, a proper chef's kitchen, a fire pit in the backyard, and a trail through the woods that I thought the girls would enjoy. I called Denise again for the catering. I ordered Brooke a camera she had mentioned wanting. I spent more on that holiday than I had in any previous year. Dinner was good. The food was excellent. Brooke seemed genuinely happy with the camera and sat at the table for an hour taking pictures of everything. For a stretch of about 2 hours, I thought maybe I had finally gotten it right. Then Gerald leaned back in his chair after dessert and said to no one in particular, "You know what would make this place perfect? A hot tub. Ray, you should have looked for one with a hot tub." Ray. Not Dad. Ray. He said it the way you complain about a restaurant that forgot your extra napkins. Easy. Automatic. Without a second thought. I looked at him across the table. At the empty plates from the meal I had paid for. At the wine glasses still half full from the case I had driven 3 hours to pick up from a vineyard he liked. At Brooke holding the camera I had saved up for since August. I did not say anything. I picked up my napkin and set it on the table and excused myself to get some air. I stood on that porch for a long time, friends. Long enough for the fire pit to die down and for the windows to glow amber and for the sounds of laughter to drift out from inside the house. And standing there, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. What would happen this Thanksgiving if I simply didn't arrange anything? The answer came to me quiet and clear, like a voice I recognized but hadn't heard in a long time. They would call. They would be upset. And then, maybe for the first time, they would understand what I had actually been doing all along. I want to pause here and ask you something, friends. After everything I just described, what would you have done at that dinner table? Would you have said something directly, or would you have let the moment pass? Tell me in the comments. Because what I decided to do next was something I had never done in 63 years, and I want to know whether you would have made the same call. September came. The family group chat woke up like it always did. Gerald sent a link to a lake house in the Virginia mountains with a message that said, "Looks available for Thanksgiving week." Patricia followed, with a note about wanting to try a different catering company this year, one she had seen on Instagram. Marcus texted that he had found a bourbon distillery nearby that did tours and asked if we could work that in. Nobody mentioned cost. Nobody asked who would be booking it. Nobody said, "Ray, are you up for this?" They simply assumed, as they had assumed for 12 years, that I would handle it. I read every message. I did not respond to a single one. A week went by, then two. The chat slowed down a little. Gerald sent a follow-up. "Ray, did you get a chance to look at that link?" I read it. I put the phone back in my pocket. I want to be honest about something. Part of me expected that my silence would prompt a real question. That someone would write, "Dad, is everything okay? We haven't heard from you." That never happened. What happened instead was that the messages kept coming as if I had already agreed. Patricia started discussing menu preferences. Marcus asked about the bourbon tour hours. Brooke sent a voice note asking if there would be a trail for hiking. They were planning a Thanksgiving trip in complete detail without a single confirmed reservation, without a single paid deposit, and without once asking the man who had paid for every prior trip whether he was still on board. October became November. Reminder emails arrived from rental companies I had used in previous years, apparently still in some database. I deleted them without opening. The catering company Denise ran sent a message asking if we wanted to reserve her team again this season. I replied that we would be sitting this year out. That was the only response I sent to anyone related to the holiday. Meanwhile, I made my own arrangements. I found a 2-room cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains about 3 hours from my house. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow porch facing west, and a wood stove that looked like it had been keeping people warm since before I was born. The whole rental cost me less than the wine budget from the previous year. I booked it, paid the deposit in full, and packed my bag 2 days early. The morning before Thanksgiving, I loaded Hank into the truck. He is 11 now, slow in the mornings, but he climbed up onto the bench seat and settled against my leg like he always does. Like the world is perfectly fine as long as we are moving together. I drove west with the radio off, and the windows cracked, and I felt something I had almost forgotten. I felt like myself. The cabin was exactly what I needed it to be. No one else's preferences to manage. No guest list to balance. No menu to coordinate. I stopped at a grocery in a small town and bought a rotisserie chicken, some bread, a wedge of cheese, and 2 bottles of a cider I had been meaning to try for months. That was my Thanksgiving. I did not miss the catered turkey for 1 second. Thanksgiving morning, I took Hank down a trail through the woods behind the cabin. The leaves were mostly gone, but the light came through the bare trees in long, thin lines, and the creek we crossed had a skim of ice at the edges. I stood there for a while with my hands in my jacket pockets, and I thought about Sandra. She would have liked this. Not the drama of what was coming, just this. The cold air and the quiet, and the dogs splashing at the edge of the water. I ate my lunch on the porch. I read for 2 hours. I took a nap. I knew the timeline, friends. I knew it because I had lived it 12 times. Gerald and his family would drive down from Northern Virginia on Thanksgiving morning, arriving mid-afternoon. Marcus would fly into Roanoke and rent a car. They would all converge on whatever address Gerald had finally decided on, probably a rental he had somehow booked himself after assuming I had not gotten around to it, or possibly a place where they showed up expecting a reservation that did not exist. I did not know exactly which scenario would unfold. I only knew it would unfold around mid-afternoon, when they arrived and found out the reality. At 3:47, my phone rang. I had been sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the shadows move across the ridge. Hank was draped across my feet. My coffee was cold. I did not mind. Gerald's name appeared on the screen. I watched it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again. Before that second call ended, Patricia's name appeared. Then Marcus. Then Gerald again. Twice. 3 times. The names cycling through like a switchboard, lighting up all at once. I sat with the phone in my hand and I counted. 11 calls in under 4 minutes. I set it face down on the armrest. The text started after the calls. Gerald first. Ray, we're at the address. There's no reservation here. What is going on? Not a question. A statement, the kind you make when you are more angry than confused. Patricia, the property manager says there's no booking under your name. Can you please call us? Marcus, bro, what is happening? We drove 4 hours. Then Gerald again, and again, each message shorter and harder than the last. I opened one voicemail. Gerald's voice was the tightest I had ever heard it. He said the rental company had no record of a confirmed reservation. He said the catering company had not been hired. He said they were standing in a parking lot outside a locked gate, and that Brooke was upset, and that someone needed to explain what was going on immediately. I finished my cold coffee. I went inside and poured a fresh cup. I stood at the window of the small kitchen and watched a woodpecker work the trunk of a dead birch tree at the edge of the clearing. Then I sat back down on the porch and I called Gerald back. He picked up before the first ring finished. His voice came through the speaker loud enough that Hank lifted his head. Dad, what is going on? We are standing outside a locked gate. There is no reservation. I let him finish. Then I asked him a question I already knew the answer to. Gerald, did you book the house? Silence. Did you pay the deposit on the rental? More silence. Did anyone contact Denise or any catering company? I heard Patricia say something in the background, low and fast. I heard Marcus say something back. Then Gerald came back on. Dad, that's not you always handle that. I had heard a version of that sentence for 12 years. You always handle that, said easily. The way you say water runs downhill. A law of nature, a settled fact. I know, I said. I always did. I didn't this year. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. The silence of someone who is understanding, for the first time, the weight of a thing they never picked up. I told them calmly that I had been covering every cost of every Thanksgiving for 12 years. I told them the number, approximately, because I had added it up the week before, and I thought they should know. I told them that in 12 years, not once had anyone asked if I was managing the budget comfortably. Not once had anyone offered to split the rental cost. Not once had anyone said thank you for the Shenandoah farmhouse, or the Charlottesville estate, or the wine, or the catered meals. I told Gerald I remembered the hot tub comment. He didn't say anything. I told them I was fine. I told them I was in the mountains with Hank, and I was having the most peaceful Thanksgiving I'd had in over a decade. And I told them that I loved them. That part was not performance. I meant every word of it. But I am not available to be managed like a logistics department, I said. I am your father, and I should have said that a long time ago. Patricia said something about how I could have warned them, that they had driven hours, and that Brooke was upset, and that this was not the way to handle things. You're right, I said. I should have said something sooner. I tried once, and it didn't go anywhere. This time, I needed you to feel it. The call ended without warmth. Gerald said a few things I will not repeat here. Marcus stayed quiet. Patricia's voice was cold. I understood. I had, in their eyes, blown up their holiday without warning. I knew that. I had made peace with it weeks earlier. I went inside and sliced some cheese and bread and sat by the wood stove and watched the fire. Friends, I want to be honest with you about the days that followed. because I think you deserve the full picture, and not just the satisfying version. There was anger. Gerald did not call for 11 days. When he did, the conversation was short and formal, the way conversations are when someone is still deciding whether to forgive you. Patricia sent a single text saying that she thought what I had done was manipulative and hurtful to the grandchildren. That one landed harder than I expected. Brooke and Leah were not part of this. That was fair criticism, and I sat with it. Marcus was the first to reach out in a real way. He called 4 days after Thanksgiving, late in the evening, and he was quiet on the phone for a while before he said, "I think I knew we were taking advantage of you. I just never said anything." That sentence was worth more to me than any apology I could have scripted. Brooke sent me a text 2 weeks later. Just a picture she had taken with the camera I gave her last year. A leaf on wet pavement. Something small and ordinary and beautiful. No caption. I looked at that picture for a long time. Gerald came around in January. He called on a Sunday afternoon and we talked for almost an hour. He did not fully apologize. He is not built that way, and I know him well enough to have stopped expecting it. But he said something that mattered. He said, "I think we put everything on you and told ourselves it was because you were good at it. That wasn't fair." I told him I appreciated that. I told him I loved him. We talked about Brooke's soccer and Marcus's new job possibility and the knee surgery I had been putting off. We talked like a father and a son. The conversation about next Thanksgiving came up near the end of the call. Gerald said they wanted to do something, if I was willing to be involved. He said they would cover the rental. He asked if I would handle the food if they covered the house. I said I would think about it. That was enough for now. Looking back on the 12 years of Thanksgivings I hosted, I can see now that what I was buying was not what I thought I was buying. I thought I was buying family closeness. I was buying proximity. There is a difference. Proximity is people in the same room. Closeness is people who ask how you are and mean it. I had plenty of the first and almost none of the second, and I had confused them for so long that losing one felt like losing both. The Thanksgiving I spent in that cabin in the Blue Ridge was the best one I have had in years. It was not the most elaborate. It was not the most expensive. It was not the one with the most people in the room or the most dishes on the table. It was the one where I woke up on a cold morning and took my dog on a trail through bare trees and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a man living his own life. Some of you are going to hear this story and think I handled it wrong. Some of you are going to think I should have had the conversation clearly, given warning, communicated like an adult instead of engineering a moment. I understand that. Honestly, some days I think that too. But I tried the direct conversation once, friends, and it was received the way a stone is received by deep water. A small splash, and then nothing. Sometimes the only way to make someone feel the weight of something is to stop carrying it. I learned something this past year that I wish I had known when Sandra died, and I started filling every empty space with my wallet. Generosity that comes without a single boundary is not generosity. It is fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, fear of the silence that comes when there is no longer anything to organize or pay for or fix. I was afraid of that silence for 12 years. Sitting on that porch in the mountains on Thanksgiving afternoon, listening to 11 calls ring through and then stop, I was not afraid of anything. The silence, it turned out, was exactly what I needed. And if you have been carrying something for someone who never once asked if the weight was getting heavy, friends, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to set it down, not to punish them, not to hurt anyone. Just because you are a person, not a resource. And some things can only be understood when the check stops coming and the phone starts ringing and there is no one on the other end to fix it. If that story found something in you today, tell me in the comments. What would you have done at that dinner table when Gerald made the hot tub comment? Would you have said something right then? Or would you have walked out to that porch and started making a different plan? And if you have ever been the person who kept the peace at the cost of your own, subscribe. Because I have more to tell you, and something tells me you need to hear it.